As someone who has only recently gone to Souls-like, I thoroughly enjoyed liesofp. While there are a lot of things about the game that make it good, like the general gameplay, music, level design, and even the aesthetic and twist on the original Pinocchio story, the thing that usually stands out in everyone's heads are the bosses. So we're going to be ranking them on difficulty. I am ranking these based on how difficult they are when you fight them, as I suspect that some of these would move down if I were to run them back with my completed build by the end of the game. With that in mind, let's start the list. At dead last we have Puppet of the Future. Puppet of the Future is by far the easiest boss. It is extremely slow, and while hard hitting, you shouldn't be hit by it in general. It has two various stomp moves that are easily avoidable, and a Beyblade move that is just as easily avoidable. The only danger that these things pose are the stages you fight them on, but the status effect that it inflicts isn't a lot of dot damage and you can easily cleanse them. Parade Master is the very first boss of the game, and as such, it is a fairly easy intro boss to the mechanics of the game. You get a decent idea of the dodge timings, and more importantly, get you a little more familiarized with the parry system, which is pretty important in this game. Other than that, this boss shouldn't give anyone too much trouble. Fittingly, the second major boss, Scrapped Watchman, isn't that much harder than Parade Master. There are a few tricky parry timings, like when it winds up its arms and slams down, and in phase 2 there are a few punishing moves it does if you're just relying on blocking. Some of the sweeping attacks can also be fairly tricky to avoid, but dodging that instead of deflecting will probably find you more success. Other than that, Scrapped Watchman shouldn't pose that much of a threat. I'm taking a note from Democracy here and putting all the stalkers in one spot. If you fought one, you've basically fought them all. There are some variations to their movesets, but not really that much. Most also dodge away when you try to attack them, but if you keep attacking them, you can land a few attacks. The only reason they go above Parade Master and Scrapped Watchman is this little shit weasel. He actually took me out a few times. But still, it isn't enough to carry the rest of the stalkers to a higher placement. Door Guardian is the first boss you fight at the final section of the game. I came into this fight with only 3 pulse cells, and I still managed to beat him due to him being a gimmick boss. He doesn't take much damage from your regular attacks, but once you stagger him and get a fatal attack off, you chunk off a large portion of his health. His attacks are all very slow, and the only real surprise you can get hit with is the animation of him falling down when you stagger him. It counts as a hit. Thankfully, I never got hit by it. Walker of Illusions is a boss I actually don't even know that much about since I beat him on my second try with pretty brainless tactics. I brute forced my way through him, and the only thing that I can see that can make the fight out of hand is the clone that he produces halfway through his health bar. But it's made out of paper, so taking out the clone first still makes the fight fairly easy. Corrupted Parade Master only goes up this high because it actually managed to take me out twice while I was on autopilot. Once I assumed the gamer position, I bodied this thing, but it's a bit faster than OG Parade Master and it applies decay, so that's something. Overall, still an easy boss. The second fight with the Blackrabit Brotherhood is a lot easier than the first. You're stronger, have access to better weapons and weapon upgrades, and your P organ is more filled up, and etc. The only tricky part here is that the siblings have the ability to apply anything from decay, overheat, and electric shock, and when there's only one sibling left, the elder brother comes back from the grave to give you a rematch. The advice he gives to take out the little sister first, since she's an agile little shit, and then to make sure to take out the remaining brothers near the same time so you can have a proper 1v1 with the elder brother. Other than that, elder brother has the same moves as the first with an additional ranged option. Folo takes his spot since it actually gave me some trouble. This was the first boss where the odd swing speeds took me some time to adjust to. I did learn to just dodge a lot of the attacks rather than trying to parry them, and once phase 2 hits, nothing really changes other than needing to dodge a few ranged attacks that are fairly slow moving. Only one that requires a bit better positioning is the AoE fire attack that Folo does, where you either have to be too far for it to hit you or you have to be behind one of the breakable pipes. But expect a long fight due to what weapon upgrades you would have had at this time and Folo's high HP. The Mad Clown Puppet is the most randomly placed boss in this game, and honestly, I really hated fighting it. But in terms of difficulty, it's right dab in the middle of all the bosses. His attack timings, primarily his own version of a Beyblade move, is pretty tricky to fully deflect since he slows down near the end. His unblockable attack also can change depending on your distance from it, so you have to watch out for that as well. Once you learn those though, Mad Puppet should be very beatable. When I was going to this boss, 2 friends of mine had said that this was one of the hardest bosses they had faced in the game so far, so I was prepared to struggle with this boss as well. It only ended up taking me 5 attempts, which is less than Folo, but I do recognize that Monster of the Green Swamp is harder than Folo. I think I had a much easier time with this boss because I learned its timings a lot faster than prior bosses and I was getting pretty comfortable with the mechanics of this game. It has a few moves that aren't even telegraphed, but even those I was able to either dodge or perfect parry. This boss fight just seemed to be the point in the game where I stopped fully struggling with bosses bar one boss that we will get to later. Victor is basically a Walmart or a Lou fight in this game, and while he did take me several attempts to beat, 7 to be exact, that's because I was basically doing no damage to him, and again it took me some time to learn the parry and dodge windows. He has a few attacks that knock you back even if you perfect parry, and a little trap move where you stagger him in phase 2 and he can still grab you as he recovers. Thankfully I managed to avoid dying to that trap, but it did almost get me. Overall, Victor is decently difficult, but there's a large gap between him and the later bosses I will mention. The final boss of this game, Simon, was honestly fairly underwhelming. He only took me, I think, 5 tries to defeat, which is less than Victor, but again, with my point earlier with Monster of the Green Swamp, I think Simon is harder than Victor, but I was just better at the game at this point. After all, I had my weapon fully upgraded, I was basically done leveling, had good talismans, and overall I had a better grasp of the game, and the general tricks it tries to pull on you with their boss design. While I struggled less against Simon, his moveset, especially in Phase 2, takes a lot more learning since there's a lot more variation. He also hits like a truck with tricky sweep attacks that vary in timing. Now we reach the top 5, and at the bottom of that is Archbishop Andreas. This fight really punishes you if you don't learn how to parry his attacks while facing him head on. The only real flaw to him is that he kinda just sits there. Sure, he moves sometimes, but most of the time you can just face him and not move much if you don't want to. He hits hard, and despite his nerfed HP by the time I fought him, is still sufficiently tanky. He has a few tricky moves that throw off timings by being delayed. His Phase 2 is also annoying if you decide to fight the side of him that has Andreas' gross centipede body, but if you run to the ass end of this thing, it's basically just Phase 1 all over again, so I suggest doing that. The first Blackrabit Brotherhood fight goes in at number 4. This was the first fight that took me to double-digit attempts, and it was mostly due to me getting absolutely rammed by the eldest brother. His move timings were so odd to me at times, and I just couldn't get a good handle on them. Thankfully, I learned them well enough to the point I could break his weapon sometime halfway through the fight. The siblings coming in here and there didn't add that much more difficulty, but still definitely an annoyance. I didn't expect this fight of all fights to be my very first major struggle. I consider this the get good boss of the game from my own personal experience. The true final boss slots in right at number 3. While this took me less attempts than the prior entry, only needing 9 attempts to beat it, I would still consider it harder, but barely. While I struggled against the Blackrabit Brotherhood due to my lack of experience in the game, Nameless Puppet still ran me a few times before I could fully adapt to its moveset. But while it is hard, I think Nameless Puppet is still pretty fair. You can naturally react to its attacks instead of guessing, and it's all very satisfying. Romeo took me a total of 24 attempts to beat. But I was never upset with the boss despite that. His two phases are very different from one another. One being the giant puppet with large windups, to this fast and agile puppet that's pulling some anime moves on you. I had to find the right balance of dodging and parrying his attacks, especially his attacks that are long strings. While I consider the Blackrabit Brotherhood my get good boss of the game, I consider this my first hard wall I had to overcome. At the very top is Laia, and I think this is a common choice to be the hardest boss in the game, period. She took me 37 attempts, and this is the one boss where I cannot confidently say I can beat her Phase 2 again if I were to run her back. Phase 1 is extremely tanky with a lot of hard-hitting moves, but being able to perfect parry basically all of them at some point was one of the most satisfying feelings I had ever had in this game. For Phase 2, she becomes a lot faster and her moves vary in speed. She can blitz at you and then pause, shoot projectiles, leap into the air and stand back down, etc. I'll go as far to say that I only beat her Phase 2 because I got fairly lucky on some of her attacks. I've also never had to buy so many items and cycle through them as much as I did for this fight. Laia easily takes the cake for the hardest boss in liesofp. If you like this content, please consider liking and subscribing, as there is more to come later down the road, specifically for the new game, Lords of the Fallen, as well as I've been working on one for Hollow Knight. See you all next time.